Oh boy.
8 years as and oh my goodness. I spent 8 years as a township commissioner, but I'm also connected with the Manheim Township Historical Society, on which I am a board member. This event is sponsored by the Township Historical Society in connection with the Township Library. And today it is my great honor to introduce Art Reist. Arthur Reist wrote a book on the Conestoga Wagon entitled Conestoga Wagon, Masterpiece of the Blacksmith. And this one is that right here, and you'll see some of these around and about. Now, it turns out that Art is a seventh generation Manheim Township resident who lives with his family over on Eden Road, his great grandfather's farm. He has been interested in the Conestoga Wagon, agriculture, blacksmithing, and champion Belgian draft horses since he was young. He'll be sharing his knowledge with the community today and sharing Conestoga Wagon artifacts, which you see on the table here. Art has a relative by the name of Roger Reist, who was at one time my law partner. So the Reist family goes back, well, at least 7 generations, obviously longer than that. But their farm on Eden Road is one that has that mural with the Conestoga Wagon painted on it. And way back in the day, as if I recall, 1755, was it Benjamin Franklin showed up in Lancaster County? There was something about the Braddock expedition. This is, of course, before the Revolutionary War, involved the ill-fated Braddock expedition to Western Pennsylvania. It was my recollection that I think Ben Franklin would have come to Lancaster County looking to get wagons, horses, and equipment for that event. So anyway, we live in a historic place, and Art Reist is going to tell you more about the Conestoga Wagon. Momentito. Thank you.
Since I'm an auctioneer, what I'm going to do is I had my daughter go get me my microphone that I always carry in my car. And we're going to just disconnect this and put this on so I can move around. Because there you go. Yeah, disconnect that down here. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you turn that up? Can you turn that up? I don't know. I can talk louder. So, you good? Okay. Yeah, because I sell cars and have to talk loud. Okay, well, thank you for allowing me to be here. We appreciate that. We're here to talk about the Conestoga Wagon. The wagon you see in this picture is an 18th century wagon. Shumway and Fry wrote a book on the Conestoga Wagon between 1750 and 1850. And it's ironic, they put, George Shumway wrote in there, there are no 18th century Conestoga wagons in existence. A couple chapters down, whoever wrote the book with him, put in there, Newt Schreiner wagon, which is the one that the Farm Museum has now. That wagon was right there in North Atlantis Valley. It was in the same family since before the Revolutionary War. So guess what my dad wrote in his side? George, you better read your own book. That's what he said. So believe it or not, we know three Conestoga wagons are 18th century. This particular vehicle is one that they said hauled freight to Braddock's troops in 1755. If it did, it only went out as far as Fort Necessity, and I'll explain why it did. Okay. The other wagons were left at Fort Necessity, and these wagons were left at Fort Necessity, and Braddock would go on with the rest. So,
Where's Fort Necessity? Is that Alleghenies up there by Braddock?
Farmington, Pennsylvania. It's out in Farmington, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Okay, yeah, because that's one of the questions or answers in my test I'm going to give you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll find out.
Thanks, Dave. It's out east of Pittsburgh. I'll explain where that is too. If you ever get a chance to go out there, how can we change these pictures? Once you do that, Caitlin. Okay, so this is an 18th century wagon. We're going to define the wagons. People get in contact with confuse a wagon with a cart. They say, they'll look at a wagon and they'll say, oh, that's a nice cart. No, it's not. It's a wagon. A coach, a wagon, and a carriage are four-wheeled vehicles. A cart is always a two-wheeled vehicle. A cart can be used to haul people, or it can be used to haul produce or freight, as in a dump cart. A dump cart would be a two-wheeled vehicle pulled by ox or horses, or a horse, and it would be have the bed so it tilts, drops the load onto the ground. So a two-wheeled vehicle is always a cart. Okay. We're going to start out with William Penn. He came here in 1682. Before he came here, he was as a young man, he was kind of a radical person or progressive. And so his father sent him to a religious school to get an education. And he became an itinerant Quaker preacher, traveled all over Europe preaching, and he came in contact with a lot of persecuted European people. So when his father was given land from King Charles, who gave it to him because William Penn's father was an admiral in the Navy, and he did such an outstanding job that King Charles thought he ought to be rewarded. So he did. Gave him the land in the colonies. Well, William Penn, in turn, got that from his father, and he had two reasons for doing that. One, he wanted to further his own fortune. In other words, he would invite those people who were persecuted over to his property, basically, sell them land, which is our ancestors, and then he'd get money in his pocket. The second thing he wanted to do is allow those people to worship as they so chose. That was a social experiment. That's why we have Quaker Town. That's why we have all these Quaker meeting houses, because of that. So Pennsylvania became a haven for the fellow Quakers. It became started in Providence of Pennsylvania in 1682. When he came over here, he traded with the Lenape Indians, which are the Delawares. They're still here. They're in Oklahoma and they're up in Minnesota. I had a chance this week to meet the president of the Delaware Indians, but her schedule and my schedule didn't work out, so I couldn't do that. But the people involved with that want me to meet her because they're interested in our tobacco. That is a prized possession, even today, for those Indians. So William Penn came here, he started trading with the Lenape Indians. He got permission to use the Great Indian Path that went from what is now Philadelphia to Lancaster to York to Mechanicsburg and down into the Virginias and the Carolina. It went to eventually down to Augusta. And it's amazing how long that was. But they said Daniel Boone walked from Birdsboro to Pensacola, Florida. How did we do that? So in 1684, he returns to England. 1699, he comes back. He leaves a school teacher by the name of James Logan as a trader to take care of his estate. 1701, he goes back to England, never to return. He passes away. So here James Logan is trading with the Indians using pack horses, which I did, because their roads, they wouldn't have roads, they were just basically a path at that time. So December 31st, 1717, he wrote in his diary that he bought a Phil horse and a Conestoga wagon at the trading post of James Hendricks. Logan also had trading posts. He even gave himself 7,000 acres of Pennsylvania because he didn't think he was getting paid enough by the Penns. There were a lot of things that I read an article printed back in the 1950s and that documented what he did. He wrote diaries, he wrote things, which is interesting. So a lot of that, he would sell people land if they built a cabin and then maybe went home to get their family and came back, he'd burn the cabin down and resell that land to somebody else. And that's something, we don't know that. Most people don't know that, but that's what the record was. Okay, a fill is a noun. It means a shaft between which a horse is hitched to a wagon. I have people tell me, they say, Art, he bought a draft horse. I said, no, he didn't buy a draft horse. He bought a thill horse. A thill horse could be a zebra. It could be any equine that will work in a pair of shafts like this by himself, pulling a wagon. But thill is a medieval term that what they used to do is use that thill horse and lead him. They did not drive them like we do, like the Amish drive. They didn't use lines. They would lead the horse. And every horse that they had, or every vehicle basically they had was a single shaft, had a shaft, whether it was a cart or a wagon or whatever it was. And that wagon, we went back up. This wagon was purchased within a few miles of his Logan's farm back in the 60s for about $25. And we never realized the historic value of that until I started doing research. And I thought, you know what, this is the type of wagon that he would have used. The only difference is this is 100 years newer than his. The reason being, technology didn't change much. You know, European technology, they were using wagons and carts for hundreds of years over Europe. See, that's why he has a European mindset, not an American mindset at that point. See?
So are you saying it was a fundamental change from that bill to actually driving a horse? That's a fundamental difference?
After a long time. In fact, when I worked for Anheuser-Busch, the manager there said that he was over Europe many times in Scotland and England, all buying Clydesdale horses, and he said they still lead their horses. They don't drive them like we do. Only the breweries would have the money to buy the horses to have multiple hitches. So anyway, back it up. Okay, we're past that. Okay. So meanwhile, all this is going while James Logan's doing all this. The French are coming in through Quebec and Ontario, going down into west or eastern Ohio, into western Pennsylvania. They build a fort there on the three rivers. What are the three rivers? Monongahela, the Allegheny, and the Ohio. What's the longest, you probably know this, what's the longest non-navigable river in the world? Anybody know?
Is it Susquehanna?
Susquehanna, right. No, a lot of people don't know that. Anyway, Lancaster's founded in 1729. Roads are starting to be built. The Great Wagon Road, like I said, is 700 miles long. It's being reopened in 1735. Mechanicsburg's becoming a city of importance because of all the mechanics, all the blacksmiths, all the Wainwrights, all the people that were making copper kettles, whatever they were making. They needed a place or a wagon to haul their freight. And Mechanicsburg had so many of those people because the Conestoga Teamsters would rather go up that way around across the Susquehanna and up that way because the waters were more quiet. When they crossed down here at Wrightsville, it was so dangerous. The water, and you go by there today, that water under the Wrightsville Bridge is always flowing fast, but up north, it's not. Imagine taking a 6-horse hitch and riding on a ferry across a river that's traveling like that. I don't know how the horses even stood on there. I don't know how you get 6 horses to do that. Okay, we're going to go back to the roads. Here's the Great Wagon Road. This is what turned into Route 11. Went from York down to Winchester, Virginia, Roanoke, Winston-Salem, and eventually on to Augusta, Georgia. Now, this is a picture taken last year of that very road. It's still here. You probably don't believe me, but it's still here. If you go down Route 81, get off at exit 29, I believe, and go in there about a half mile or a mile, it'll be on the right side. It's still here. You can see that's what it looked like when William Penn was here. It would have been just looked like a deer path there. See the track? But if you look at that really closely, you can see that road's only like 10 or 12 feet wide. That's the road still there. And that's about 100 feet from a friend of mine owned a farm behind there. His barn bank was only like from here that wall away from that road. And he said during the Civil War, the Southern soldiers would come up that road and the Northern soldiers would go down right back in his barn. So when did they burn his barn down? We're going to talk about another road. We're going to talk about Fort Necessity, started the French and Indian War, like Mr. Meekum said. That was started in the early 1750s. Governor Dinwiddie realized that the French were out there, he was governor of Virginia, realized that the French were out there trapping, fishing, hunting, and build a fort. And he said, you can't do that, that's on English soil. So he sends a young Lieutenant Colonel Washington out to tell the French that they couldn't be there. It took like 150 men. He goes out there, he sees some French and Indians, they have a battle. A lot of the French and Indians are killed. the commander's brother, that's the commander of Fort Duquesne, Fort Duquesne, his brother was killed. So when those Indians that did get killed go back to the fort, they tell the commander, he sends his men and the Indians after Washington. Well, Washington probably didn't realize what was going on. He figured, well, the skirmish settled the dispute. We'll go back to Virginia. Well, he got back to Farmington, Pennsylvania, which is now Farmington, Pennsylvania, to the Great Meadows. And his scouts said, the French and Indians are coming after you. So what he did is he had his men build a temporary fort. They called it Fort Necessity. Why would they do that? It was a necessity. That's what it was. Anyway, they go in there. It's rainy. It's foggy. It's damp. I always tell people he'd have been better off putting tobacco away, putting it down, because that's what you need. That kind of weather, you need to put dry tobacco down. Have damp weather. It was so foggy, so damp, and so ugly that his men could not shoot their guns because the powder got damp. But there's a reason for that too. I'll explain that later. So anyway, he's out there in the fort, can't fire his guns. The French and Indians surround him. He surrenders. It's the only time Washington surrenders. He surrenders. He goes and is let go. He signs French surrender papers, which he doesn't even know what he's signing. He heads back to Virginia again. Well, lucky for him that the Indians weren't there and not the French. If the French would not have been there, they'd have wiped him out completely, because he was trespassing on their ground. But the French let him go. So he went. Washington went back, told Governor Dinwiddie. Governor Dinwiddie sends word to King Charles II. King Charles sends Braddock to fight the French and Indians. Well, the word came from Virginia. So Braddock, he goes down to Virginia, sails down to Virginia, goes to unload his supplies, and he can't because there's nothing there to haul. There's no wagons or anything. And Franklin was there, like Mr. Meekum said. Franklin was there. He says, well, if you'd have landed in Philadelphia, all the German Swiss, all the Scotch Irish, all those people build wagons, and they're hauling wagons back and forth, hauling things back and forth all the time. They had plenty. So Braddock says, well, then you're the one to procure those for me. So Franklin goes up, puts it out in the Pennsylvania Gazette, says, volunteers wanted, to haul this freight for King Charles. Well, 15 wagons showed up and they were absolute junk. Apparently, they were not serviceable. So he puts another ad in. He says, if you are own a wagon, a team of horses, a team of oxen, you are required to haul freight for King Charles. Well, 150 wagons show up. My ancestor being one. He was 23 years old. And he had a brother named Abraham, and they bred the Conestoga team horse. I'll explain all that too. The thing is, when they had a discussion, Abraham with Jacob. Jacob was 23 years old. He says, I'm not married. I don't have any kids. You're married. You have a son, or you have children. You stay here and I'll go on and haul freight. And that's what happened. So he goes and hauls the freight for them, and then ends up getting killed. I have Abraham Reist Bible. Stated 1723 with his signature in it. We don't have Jacob's Bible. Why wouldn't we have Jacob's Bible? Because he took it with him. Probably got burned, as well as our family wagon. Okay, so they went out. They all met at Cumberland, Maryland. Braddock starts building the road, literally building the road, 12 feet wide. He has 1,500 soldiers with him, plus all the civilian people like yourselves, all helping to help the army get through. And Washington said, don't take all that. He says, you travel lightly. Don't take all your wagons and all that. Well, Braddock didn't listen. He thought he knew everything. He thought, well, I can handle these people. They're just heathens. They don't know anything. Well, he gave them an education, didn't he? So anyway, they build this road, and it goes out to Fort Necessity. They call that Braddock's Trace. He's walking in the footsteps of who? Washington, right? So he gets out to Fort Necessity. Braddock leaves some of the wagons there. The wagon you saw in the picture, he left that there. It was too big to go through that 12-foot road. They literally built a road from Fort Necessity out towards Fort Duquesne. Went over the map. Imagine that. Cutting trees down, moving rocks, and you have horses calling each other. You have the oxen bawling, and you have all this going on. How in the world didn't he think that the French and Indians weren't going to hear him. Because, you know, you can hear a rooster crow and you can hear for miles in mountains. So anyway, he gets within 40 miles of Fort Duquesne. They said the Indians and French attacked him. In a half an hour, 1,500 people met their demise. Imagine that. Not just soldiers, not just the military, but all the civilians too. And I imagine even children, because they would have gone on with their parents to help maybe make this meals or whatever. And that's something. So we think about things that are happening today, happened back then too. So here, by that time, Braddock is mortally wounded. Washington has 3 horses shot out from him. They say 3 or 4. It could be any number. So when Braddock is mortally wounded after the battle, they carry him back to Fort Necessity. Okay, he's wearing a red sash. It's silk. That has a meaning as well. If one was a commander in the military, he would wear his sash over his shoulder. If he was under that commander, he would wear it around his belt. See, you know what that was for? Anybody know what that's for?
Carry them if they got wounded.
Exactly. If they got wounded or they got killed, they put them in there, use that as a litter. Carry them back, and that's what they did. It's exactly right. It's true. So from 1755 to late 1755, that road was abandoned because the Conestoga Wagon Teamsters didn't want to go there, or all those nasty people there, so they didn't go. 1797, they started to work on the road a little bit. By 1818, they reopened it, and then they called it the National Road. And when Braddock was wounded, he died there at Fort Necessity. They buried him in the road, drove over him, so the Indians were desecrated. In the 1930s, they said they came across a burial site in the middle of the road and they were rebuilding it. They think it was Braddock. And why wouldn't they know? Why wouldn't somebody know, you know, who that was? Probably Braddock. So then the next road we're going to talk about, and keep in mind, Conestoga Teamsters are hauling freight back and forth all the time. Well, when Braddock had that campaign, Daniel Boone was at the back of the pack. He knew what was going to happen because he grew up in Birdsboro playing with the Indians. He grew up with those people. He knew what was going to happen. Well, he got away and went back to Birdsboro. He went back to Birdsboro and stayed there till 1775. And then he got tired of all the people. He said it's getting too crowded. Imagine it, too crowded. So he left there and took his family down the old Wagon Road, the great Indian path down to Roanoke. And this time he went from Roanoke over towards the Cumberland Gap. And from the Cumberland Gap up to Lexington, Kentucky. You can see that how the road went. That road is 200 miles long. Well, they call that Boone's Trace. He was following in the footsteps of a man by the name of Dr. Walker, who was a long hunter. Dr. Walker was a physician in Philadelphia. He loved to be a long hunter. He liked to be out in the wild. He liked to be traveling. So he got like 30 men together. They headed down the Great Wagon Road in 1735. Not 1755 or 75, 1735. They went down there. See? And they got to what is now Roanoke, went across and found the Cumberland Gap. They did not discover it. The American Indian discovered it thousands of years before. Anthropologists say and suggest, maybe I'm wrong, Dan, they say that the Indians came from eastern Russia across the Bering Straits after the Ice Age, down through what is Canada, what is Alaska, down into our country. It took them 30,000 years to go from there to here. 30,000 years, that's what anthropologists say. They were here 18,000 years before the white man. Does anybody know who was the first white man to discover, or European to discover this country, or this continent? Exactly, Leif Erikson, in 1000 AD. People say, well, how about Columbus? Well, he landed in St. Kitts. We were down in St. Kitts. I don't consider that part of our continent. That's out in the middle of the ocean, as far as I'm concerned. But Leif Erikson did. Yeah. And there's still artifacts. I bought an axe several years ago that we believe came from his group. I bought a Reagan in Lancaster County for $20. The man said, "You don't know anything about axes." I said, "No, I don't know anything."
1,000 years old.
Yeah. Oh, there's stone axes. That's another thing. Stone Indian axes. My brother just sold one in a public auction. He told the people it's 10,000 years old. It brought $7,400. See, an axe, that's Stone Age people. The tomahawk is metal. See. Okay, we'll go on this. So anyway, Dr. Walker went down there. He and Boone followed his example and followed that same way. And that road was 200 miles long. This is what the Cumberland Gap looks like today. We were down, what, a year or so ago. We took pictures of that. The next road we're going to talk about is the Lancaster to Philadelphia Turnpike. Started in 1792. It went from Lancaster to Philadelphia. There was an account where a man said he walked to Philadelphia and counted 150 wagons, passed 150 Conestoga wagons going down and coming back. So there was a private company that decided they would like to rebuild that road and make it a lot better. So they did. They got permission to do that, and they sold stock to pay for that road. They thought that would pay for it. That's the first form of the stock exchange. Then that didn't pay for the road, so they decided they were going to build a toll road and use a turnpike. That's a medieval way of paying taxes too. The royalty owned most of the land, so if they wanted you to pay taxes or tolls, they would stop you with a knight who had a pike in his hand and let you pay the taxes. Then he'd turn his pike and let you walk by. That's where the turnpike expression turnpike came. So that worked. So the Livingston Oregon Pike, we named all these pikes, you know all of them, Marietta, Fruitville, Old Philadelphia. So we go down with my son and Kate and my daughter. We go down to a trade school with my son, who was going to study blacksmithing. And we pull in the driveway. Here we see turnpike. They put a toll gate there. It's basically a toll gate. That's to let that farmer take his tractors and equipment into the hayfield and back out, and still keep people from driving in there. So that's what they might have looked like at some point. Also, going down that turnpike, one would see mile markers almost every mile. They're still there. Almost all of them are still there. They'd see a tavern almost every mile. They might, if you walked into a tavern, one might see a sign that says "Mind your P's and Q's." It means mind your pipes and cords. And then also that says not just what you drink, but what your bill is. Make sure you have enough to pay your bill. You also might see the rules of the tavern. 4 pence a night. 4 pence a night for bed, 6 pence for supper, no more than 5 to sleep in one bed. How about that? No more than 5 to sleep in one bed. What would that be like in the summertime? Okay. No boots to be worn in bed. How about that? Organ grinders to sleep in the waif house, which is the wash house. No dogs allowed upstairs, no beer allowed in the kitchen, no razor grinders or tinkers taken in. So the razor grinders and tinkers probably are the lowest people on the social totem pole. They're probably the people they don't want to have in the tavern.
Are the Sam Route 340, the old Philly pipe?
Yes, that's one of them. Yeah. Okay. That's one of my questions. Test. I know, I'm just teasing you, Dave. He goes to our church, so I can do that. Anyway, yeah. If you have any questions, ask me those. I don't mind. Very good. So here are a whole bunch. There are several mile markers. The one top row, second from the left, I made, and to put in our driveway, which didn't belong there, but I put that there. And I get a lot of people take photographs of that. And they say, "Art, how old is that?" "Man, that is really old." I say, "Well, how old do you want it to be?" But you see the old ones there. The one below it, I think, is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, mile marker. You can hardly read it. It's in somebody's yard. You can see that. A lot of these are people's yards. Okay. And these are along 23. I think a lot of these are along 23. The settlers who came here were German, Swiss, Scotch, Irish, English, and French Huguenots, which were the Protestants. And they were the Mennonites, they had the Moravians. Most of these settlers had a trade. They were millers and coopers and farmers and glassblowers and weavers. The blacksmiths, the wainwrights, and the wheelwrights built the wagons. And you had the tanners and the carpenters. Now, we have pictures of some of the tools. I tell people we have the tools that made the wagons. The anvil on the right is probably made about 1600, the year 1600. My son just bought one, it's probably made in the 1500s, identical to it. Brought over on a clipper ship, I can explain all that. They had a big oak chest that they would make, not pine, not poplar, oak. We have one. We have one that was made in between the year 1550 and 1650 called the Jacobean times. That's what they would do. They make a chest, put things like this is these are blacksmith's anvils. The one, like I said, the one on the right, early 1600s. The one on the left is probably late 1600s, early 1700s. But they put all their belongings in that chest and bring it over because that's all they had. See, the settlers who came here, they were farmers, came here because they liked the fertile soil. We have a couple farmers right there that know that. This picture right here, we have bearded barley. That's a 7-acre field of bearded barley. There are 2 fields on either side that are worked. They have soybeans planted in them. And then the corn is on the far side. This is called Hagerstown loam. The same kind of soil you get in Hagerstown, Maryland. It's all limestone. And on this property here in Man Township, we have 2 places where we need to pick our tool up, our machinery up, and put it over top the rock. No, we can't. They know where they are when we run our tools. How many farms can you say that about? That's all tillable soil, every square inch.
You're saying you got 2 spots where there's bedrock?
Yes.
You gotta get around.
Yeah. Okay, and we have, these are the things that hold. Conestoga wagon was designed and made to haul freight only. It might have hauled people from time to time, but it was not designed to haul people. It was designed to haul freight. You can see all the list there of the different things. The weaving equipment would be yarn winders, spinning wheels, flax brakes, barn looms, swifts, what else? Here, whole list of good things. Agriculture product, and they hauled things in barrels. We'll show you a dry barrel and a wet barrel. Then we'll talk about how the wagons were built. Like I said, they were built by blacksmiths. They did the iron work. They worked with the wheelwright. The wheelwright built the wheels. The wainwright built the wagon bed. He was like a cabinet maker. He wasn't a carpenter. He wasn't a wood butcher. Everything he did was focused on the result of hauling those wagons. The swale in the bed was an idea from the English people. The extended tailgate and headgate were again English design, and that allowed the bows to extend out over the wagon bed to protect the load. The beds were made originally pine or fir. Then they went to poplar. They were red beds. They were not blue. I have a wagon at home that's a red bed. I've seen probably 3, and they were farm type. Again, they didn't go out on the road. They were the original ones, the early ones. They did not have bows. They did not have a feed box. So you have a bed was poplar or pine. The running gear was made out of oak. The running gear is the wheels, front hounds and back hounds. We'll explain that too. The axles were white oak or hickory. The hubs are black or sour gum. The felloes were oak. We'll explain all what those parts are. The hounds, which connects, you can see the hounds. Now I wish I had a pointer. I don't have a pointer. There you go. Right there's the hound. Yeah, you can use that, Caitlin or Heather. Same in the back. They had a front hounds and back hounds. They were coupled together by a coupling pole. On a carriage, they call it a reach. A reach connects the front hounds or front wheels to the back wheels. The cover was soaked in, was made out of hemp. That's why we have the hemp field. It was soaked in lacquer to make it waterproof. The curvature in the bed allowed the load to stay in the center. In other words, when they were going uphill, up an incline, the back of the wagon will level off. They're going down a decline, the front of the wagon will level off. Pretty simple, simple idea, isn't it? Notches on the end gate, we'll show you those. The bolsters made the wagon's bed stronger, and there was an axe carrier. I'm going to show them an axe carrier. Axe carriers were different designs. They were driven into the hounds, so the axe would fit between the hounds and that piece of metal there. So they were okay. Here's a picture of the gates. These are the notches. That's a German Swiss idea, and that keeps the wood from splitting. And that wagon's probably 200 years old. You see, the wood's still good. Had they not done that, it would split. On the next picture on the left there, we have the wagons. The early wagons were nailed together from inside out, and then the nails were clinched over. This Jacobean chest, or Jacobean chest that I have, because back in the 1500s, it's made exactly like that. They didn't put a rivet in, or they drove it down from the inside out and bent it over. This picture on the left shows the rivets that they used to make. They used to drill a hole, make a rivet, slide the rivet through there, and then mushroom the other side off, flange the other side off, and that would hold that whole wagon side together. Also, the front wheels were different size than the back. The front were smaller than the back. I had a man ask me that the other day. He said, "Art, why are the front wheels smaller than the back wheels?" I said, "Simple." "What's that?" I said, "They didn't put enough air in the tires." He goes, "Oh, yes." They made it the smaller wheel in the front because they could turn the wagon sharp. And it was tough enough. I know you haven't driven any, but I have, and it's very difficult to maneuver those around. They were not an inner city vehicle as the later ones were. The later wagons had a fifth wheel. You had four wheels in the ground, and a fifth wheel is horizontal to the ground, and you could turn the front wheels almost under the body of the vehicle. Conestoga wagons could not do that. They had a rub plate. I'm going to show them on this model. They had a, when you turn the, yeah, just turn the, yeah. See how they have the rub plate there? That wheel would rub it. Just pull a pole, and they can see it. You turn it, you can only go so far, and you hear the wheel rub on the side of the wagon. They put a rub plate on there because if you don't have a rub plate, when you turn that wagon, the tire will cut that rail right in half. And they figured all that out. The wagons were different sizes. I talked about, so one gentleman, how he shrunk the wooden, the iron tire around the wooden bellows. I'll explain all that at some point. Wagons were different sizes from 12 to 17 feet long, about 36 inches deep, and they were basically 46 inches wide. They were standard width. That's why somebody could take off the wagon bed and put it on another running gear, or take buy a bed somewhere and put it on a running gear under the bed. The bolster, which is the front, around here. I'm going to show them what the bolster is in the front. Just put right there. Yeah, here, Heather. Just right here. Just right here. The bolster, yeah, we take it apart. The bolster on the Conestoga wagon is fastened. It's not on this one, but it's fastened to the bed. The front one is. That strengthens that bed. That is where the kingpin, show them the kingpin there, Heather, down at the other end. Down at the other end there. The kingpin over there. But, yeah. Yeah, the kingpin would go down through the bed, down through the bolster, and then down into the axle. And that's what is the articulating part of the wagon. That's what turns the wagon. But again, the wagon could not turn very sharp because of the heavy load and the small wheels. So they made them smaller so they could turn a little better. Here's a picture of the linchpin wagon wheels. They were made so that if somebody rotated the notch in the hub over top that linchpin, you can take a hammer pin and pop that out, remove the wheel, grease it, put it back in. You know, in the Western movies, and people watch television all the time, they see these wagons flip over and the wagons come apart, the wheels fall off. That didn't happen with us. You had to break the axle before the wagon would lose the pin. They had feed boxes. The feed boxes were hung. Not all wagons had feed boxes. Just over the road did. The farm wagons, most of them did not. They would hang a feed box on the back with chains, and in the evening, they wanted to feed their livestock. They'd take that off and put that on the pole of the wagon. You want to show them the pole there? Show them the model. Yeah, right there. They put that on the pole. We'll show you another picture of that. Feed their horses, and in the morning, feed them again, and go and put the feed box right back on the back of the wagon. We explained all that, how the early beds were red beds. This is the first vehicle to have an independent braking system. Up until then, they used chains. This is a rough lock chain. Everybody can lift that up. I don't know how heavy that is, but it's that would be put on the wheel. We'll show you that. Put on the wheel, and that would block. That would the wheel would block the wagon wheel from turning, and then you would skid that down the road. But they learned that doesn't work either, because as you're skidding that wagon down the road, that wheel is wearing thin, the tire is wearing thin. So they put what they call an ice cutter or a skid shoe on it, like this. This is an early one. This goes back in the 1700s. So you know how narrow the tire is. That's an early wagon. So that would prevent the tire from rubbing again because it would rub on this iron. They also had, like I said, ironwork had a lot of religious connotations: the fish, the hearts, the tulip, the snakes, and these wagons were also pulled by 4 or 6 or 8 Conestoga team horses. I have now extinct. They are not actually extinct. They were never really a true breed. I was at an Amish sale back in the spring, and I saw a horse that was identical to the Conestoga team horse. There wasn't a white hair on that horse. He was all like chocolate, a dark bay color, really dark. He stood 16 hands, weighed about 1,600 pounds. He had no foot, basically what I call no foot. The reason we know that they're not extinct and they weren't any particular breed is because nobody registered, nobody documented the breed characteristics. They didn't have a registry like we do in Belgians or Clydesdales or whatever, or even beef cattle that all have a registry. Well, they didn't do that then. They didn't document breed characteristics. Breed characteristics, by that I mean a Percheron is going to have a Percheron type of head, a Clydesdale is going to have a different type of head, a Belgian is going to have a different type of head. They didn't do that. They just wanted to get horses and breed horses. This is what a Conestoga team horse apparently looked like. That horse at that Amish sale was very similar to this. If you see a little addition ahead of this horse, you point that out. That comes from the Arab breeding. The Arabs came up, I don't know what year would that have been, Dan, but they came up into Europe they wanted to take over Europe. They wanted to take over the Europeans. So they brought their Arab horses up there and they were crossing with Flemish mares. So that's where you have a head like that. That's an Arab horse will have additions head. Belgians, we don't want that. Clydesdales, we don't want that. But that's where that comes from. Also, these wagons were pulled by oxen. These are Jersey oxen. There's my son Andrew. Girls drove this team. Don Bergerbiel, who was head of the transportation department at the Smithsonian, said this is the type of wagon that probably was used to haul freight for Braddock's troops. See, they hadn't developed the big wagons yet because the roads weren't available. But this team of oxen, you could do anything with, and they would travel slowly, but they would live off almost nothing. So they were good for some purposes, but they weren't quite fast enough. Okay, we talked about a skid shoe as this is. This was used, like I said, to slide the wagon down the road. We have a wheel lock. This would be fastened onto the wheel as well. That would act like a block. The rough lock you see here would do the same. On this one, we have an ice cutter. That was used in the wintertime, and see how the picture of the ice cutter actually under the wheel, chained to the wheel. And so when they're going down a road and it's icy, that ice cutter will cut into the ice or cut into the sleet or whatever, snow or whatever, and prevent the wagon from going sideways.
Jack.
And there's a Conestoga team jack, a Conestoga wagon jack. I actually used that to lift that wagon up. Also, these wagons had hubcaps. They were the first vehicles to have hubcaps. Here's a Conestoga wagon jack. We have that there. You want to pull that up there? Most jacks, we used to think that all jacks were dated and signed. They're not all dated and signed. I'm going to show them where that is, Heather, up there in the post. Right up there is where they are. You can come up and look at these later. It's right under the yoke. They would put somebody's initials or the date when the wagon jack was made. And therefore, when they got to a tavern or somewhere, and people would take all the harness off, and all the teams, and you might see 20 or 30 at a stop. Well, they get all that mixed up, so they put their names on things. The housing on that Conestoga harness, you want to show them that? You can see that. You can see the initials. People say, why did they put the initials on their harness? Well, that's because everybody's harness looks the same. So if you had your initials on there, you knew whose harness was whose. Here's a tar pot like we have right here. You can come up and actually smell that. They used all the lard, the rendered lard that they would, for butchering, they'd save all that. They'd save anything, grease fat or whatever they were cooking, and they would put that in there, pine tar from the pine trees. They'd all mix that up, heat it up, and put that in there for greasing their wheels. And one man asked me, he said, well, which wheel would they grease? I said, simple. What's the old saying? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? That's what they did. Dan, if I say anything wrong, you let me know. He's a history teacher, he is. Okay, here we had, we're gonna compare the farm type Conestoga wagons versus the freight type Conestoga wagons. The early wagons were made in 1700s, the early 1700s. The freight type were made later because they had better roads. Wagon wheels went from linchpin to the nuts. And like I said, the red, the blue, the sideboards, when they have a clinch, we described all that. One.
What's the significance of the coloring? Any idea why red and then blue?
I don't know. My dad would probably, you know, Dan, I don't know.
Cheapest paint.
Could be. Yes, that would be.
Red barns.
It was a-
Red orange.
Yeah, that's a milk paint too, wasn't it? It's a milk paint, yeah. If anybody has experiences or knowledge that I don't know, or I'm saying something you don't think is right, let me know. I don't mind. Yes.
You don't have to go back to it, but the lithograph you had at the country grant form, is that from out of the Conestoga Valley?
I don't know. I don't know.
The
Like-
book, the book,
Yeah,
The
that's
yellow-
Comes through
no,
Valley.
it's from the yellow,
You could, oh,
Champagne book.
it's Champagne Friday.
There is a short synopsis and brief description that they recorded.
Yeah, but whether that's true or not, Tyler, I don't know. A lot of these things, I've been in the horse business for 40 years. Bred some of the best Belgian, or been around the best Belgian Persian and Clydesdale horses in the world. And some of these things I see that were written bogus, aren't true, because they weren't horsemen. Anyway, here's a freight wagon, it's Conestoga type, but it's not a Conestoga wagon. This hauled 8 to 10 tons of bricks from Chambersburg to Hagerstown. Took 8 to 10 horses to pull it. My daughter has a set of bells that go on an 8-horse hitch. There are only 7 racks. There's 2 5s, 4 4s, and 1 3 or something like that. Reason being is the teamster got tired of sitting on the wheel horse with the bells under his nose day after day after day and listening to that all the time. So he took I knew the man, I met the man whose great-great-grandfather owned them. He was 91 years old. He said, my great-great-grandfather took them off because he got tired of going to Philadelphia and hearing all that racket all the time. And he said, we never put it back again. He didn't know where they got to, but he knew where the other 7 were. So imagine that. Anyway, also, this is kind of trivia that you guys can put in your resumes. On a wagon, it has nuts on the axles. There's a left-handed thread and a right-handed thread. If I'm on this side of the wagon and I'm going to tighten that wheel or tighten that nut, whichever direction the wagon goes forward, the nut tightens. Whichever wagon that goes backwards is going to loosen. So this is a left-handed thread because you're going to turn it to the left to make it tight. You go on the other side, you're going to turn it to the right to make it tight. So that's another thing. People get these vehicles and they beat up the nuts on them. And I said, well, you're going the wrong direction. Oh, everything turns to the right. I said, no, it doesn't. See? So anyway, here's a freight wagon, a very beautiful freight wagon. Go ahead and turn. Here's a Nissan wagon. This is down at the Appalachian School for the Museum of Appalachian. Museum of Appalachian. What is that, Route 25 or 75? It goes north out of Knoxville. If you ever get a chance to get to Knoxville, go north on 75. They have a beautiful museum up there called Museum of Appalachian. They have a country western Hall of Fame, a small Hall of Fame there. Fantastic. This is in this museum. They have about, I don't know how many acres, 50 acres, I don't know. A lot of beautiful tools, all sorts of neat things. At the top of the steps in his museum, there's a Nissan wagon. John Nissan made wagons. People say, oh, these are Conestoga wagons. They're not Conestoga wagons. The Virginia people call them the Moravian wagon because he had a shop 15 miles west of Winston-Salem. And he made wagons from 1834 to 1940. This is a later one, of course. But his family or his company ran from 1834 to 1940. It had bows, and some had feed boxes, some didn't. I was talking about the barrels and how they hauled freight in barrels. You can see the dry barrel up on the left, the dark one there. Yeah, there's one there, and there's one also. The one on the right was used to haul liquid. Take it out of there. There you go, right there. Now, here's something interesting too, is trivia to you, but these Conestoga wagon teamsters in the summertime, they were farm wagons, they were farming with them. In the summertime, they had what they call windlass, which is a pole about 6 feet long with holes in it, mounted to the ceiling, just like a winch. They take a rope from the top of that, down underneath the wagon bed, up to the other side, and do that in front and back, and they lift that wagon bed off. Newt Schreiner did exactly that. In John and Wake's book, printed in 1930s, it shows a picture of Newt Schreiner's wagon hanging up below the barn. That's why that wagon gear, I'll tell you later, that's why that wagon gear, the original wagon gear, is not with it today. I know where that is. I see it every day in my own barn. It's lucky we knew what it was. Somebody told us how it happened. But anyway, they would take this bed off, put the hay ladders on, which is back there in the back, and they'd haul hay all summer because it was loose. And then when fall came and they needed to haul their crops again, they'd take the hay ladders off and then lower their bed right back on the running gear, put the kingpin in, and they were ready to go. Here's another farm type Conestoga wagon with Andrew standing next to it. This wagon is something that Don Berkebile from the Smithsonian also said would have been used to haul freight to Braddock's troops. It's a farm type wagon. It's an early wagon. Did not have a feed box, had a toolbox, and had bows. We don't call them hoops, we call them bows. And these bows are new. The original bows would have gone straight up the wagon and flat up here. They'd be flat and then down. They weren't completely round. You can see here's Elmer Lappin, his champion 6-horse bell team, pulling a Conestoga wagon for the, I guess, museum. He's riding the wheel horses. The wheel horses are the ones closest to the wheel. The ones in front of him are the swing horses, and the ones in front of that are the lead horses. The lead horses would have a rack of bells, 5 bells to a rack. The swing team would have a rack of 4 bells each, and the wheel team would have a rack of 3. So there's a rack of 3 bells. We'll let you ring them too. When you come up, you can ring those.
Jen talked about the lazy boy.
And they had a lot of wagons had lazy boards. They said because the apprentice that was working with the teamster would get lazy walking, because everybody walked. They said if he got lazy and didn't want to walk, he'd ride a lazy board. Some wagons did not have that. The early wagons did not have a lazy board. I guess they just took for granted they were going to walk. They drove it.
What purpose did the bells serve?
Very good question. I was going to get to that. What they would do is they use that for money. If a teamster would have a problem, maybe he broke a wheel or something happened, he was obligated to pay somebody and pay for the use of helping. If somebody came along and said, "Oh, I'll help you fix that." Well, they didn't carry money with them all the time, but they were obligated to give a rack of bells to that person as payment. That's why I have yet to see, well, I shouldn't say that. We have one set of bells that's four racks of 3s that are all the same, exactly the same. That tells me that man had a small wagon with only 4 horses, bought all those bells together, used all those bells, and probably didn't go far from home because he didn't have to give any away. So those bells are the only 4 that I've ever seen in my lifetime, and my dad never saw any either, that aren't mixed up. In other words, we have a set of, like Heather's set of 8 bells. You'll see a rack that doesn't match the next one, that maybe 2 look alike, but then that one doesn't match, this one doesn't match, that one doesn't match, because they were swapping bells all the time. So that's the saying, come home with your bells on. That's where they get the saying, and see you with your bells on. Right, that's right. So that's another thing my daughter said. They would use those bells, since the roads were so narrow, they would use those bells to identify that they were coming down the road and let other people know. Also, the reason the teamsters, Elmer's driving on the left side, is because the roads are so narrow that the teamster had to look back when another team was coming towards him to see how close their hubs were so they wouldn't hit the hubs. That's why we drive on the left side of the road. Okay? And pass.
The bells were always ringing. That was an integral part of the experience for people who
It was.
might
That's
spend
right.
thousands of miles.
Yeah.
Right? The bells were always
Always ringing. Yep. And probably their ears too. So here shows a picture of Elmer with his horses again, driving with a jerk line. We have a jerk line here. And you want to go get the end of the jerk line? Here's a jerk line. If the teams are, the part that Heather's holding is called a jerk rein. It's the one side is half inch shorter than the other. And I asked Elvin Lapp, who's a friend of mine and son of Elmer, why they had such a short distance between the length of one side and the other side. He said, if you jerk on this line and the one side of that line would be extra long or longer, he said the team of horses would always go in that direction. So he said it only is about a half inch difference. But he said the horse could tell it in his mouth. He can tell if you jerk this, and when you come up, you can touch this. This is a real jerk line, by the way. And this is usable. We have probably, I think, 5 or 6 or 7. They're usable. Elvin said that. He said, "Oh my gosh, Artie," he said, "how many do you have that are like this?" I said, "Oh, a couple." He said they're actually usable. And this is probably 200 years old. So what he would do is they put the jerk line on the lead horse, which is on our right there. Yeah, there you go. Is on our right. They put that jerk line just on him, and there's a jockey stick like this that goes between. There you go. Goes between the hames of the lead horse to the outside bit of the offside horse. So wherever that lead horse turns, wherever he turns, that jockey stick is going to pull his bit. Just think how rough that is on their mouth. So I had a man ask me a question. He said, "Well, how do you hold them back? How do you keep that lead horse, the offside lead horse, from going wherever he wants to go?" Well, they have what they call a holdback strap on the bit of the bridle. That offside horse is a chain, and a ring sits in there, and that's called a floating ring. They would fasten a holdback strap to that, and then back on a spreader. I'm going to show them the spreader. This is what they'll lift that up, Heather. Yeah. This is what they would fasten to the wagon, the pole of the wagon, or and back of those swing horses and the lead horses. And there's a chain there. See that chain? Put that chain up there. They would fasten that holdback strap from that horse's bit back to that ring. So if that offside horse, thought he was going to go faster than all the rest, he's going to have to pull the load with his mouth. And that works. The Amish do that all the time now. They have a holdback strap. I've seen chains where they fasten the bit and chain on the bit and take it back to the other horse's hip strap or something like that. So if that lead mule wants to go faster, he's going to pull that whole load with his mouth. That's why sometimes you see a mule with his head up like this and he's trying to go, but he can't go because that holdback strap's holding back. Here's the Zane Grain Museum Conestoga wagon. It has 13 bows. Remember I talked about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 bow wagon. This is a 13 bow wagon. Has 2 toolboxes, one on either side, which is unusual. Has a double tree up front there with the wheel horses are hooked to. Turn that. This is a Hagley Museum Conestoga wagon. If you've ever been out of Hagley Museum, it's DuPont's. DuPont's built their powder mills down there. On the side of this cover, it says 1802 on that wagon. And one of the tour guides was telling people the wagon was built in 1802. I took her aside and I said, "Ma'am, it's not." I said, "I don't want to disappoint you, but it's not." I said, "It's built about 1835 to 1840. "Well, how do you know that?" I said, "Because I know wagons." And I said, "That wagon is a big wagon. Back in 1802, they wouldn't have had the roads to handle that wagon. It has wide tires. It's a huge wagon. It's beautiful. It just needs linseed oil and turpentine. And that's what we use to preserve our wagons. Every once in a while, every couple of years, we'll take linseed oil and turpentine, 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 linseed oil, 1/3 turpentine, and we paint that on the wagons, and it's a natural wood preservative. If they did that to this wagon, you wouldn't believe it. They'd bring all that color out. It'd be fantastic. Here's New Shriner's wagon right there north of Lance Valley. That needs linseed oil and turpentine too. But like I said, that was in the same family since before the Revolutionary War. Again, it's on an 18th century wagon bed. on a 19th century running gear. You did that because he wanted to protect the old running gear. And we were fortunate enough when they sold this wagon, several months later, the man that bought the original running gear from Mrs. Schreiner, because she didn't know, he died and his sale went through the auction. And we knew because he told us before he died, he said, look, this wagon gear that I have, nobody's going to know. But he says, I bought this from Mrs. Schreiner back about 1960, probably for $100. And he said, that belongs to that. I have all the chains, we have all that goes to that wagon. But here's a great spot for it, the museum, they're taking really good care of this. And it still has a nice running gear. You can actually pull that. I can hook a team to that and drive that wagon. It's all it needs is to have the wheels greased and it's ready to go. So they take really good care of it. And they have some fine vehicles up down there. If you ever get a chance to go to Landis Valley, I'm sure a lot of you have. This is an ST's Conestoga wagon, 11 bow. They have one just like at the Farm Museum on display. You see the rough block we have on the wheel there. That's like this. Here's a Valentine Moyer Conestoga wagon, small wagon, early wagon, 17th century, 18th century, excuse me, 18th century. You see the hounds, showing the hounds there, Heather. They can see the hounds really clear. That's right there. And then the front of the hounds, showing up there where the pole is. My dad used to say that's the Achilles heel of the wagon. If somebody pulls that around without putting the pole in, and they aren't careful and they break that, that's the wagon's rendered useless, completely useless. And they did have that happen even with horses. That's why when they fastened this double tree. I'm going to show them the double tree on that wagon. When they put the double tree on there, they had what they call stay chains. They would pull from the axle, not just the hounds up front. They would pull the wagon and turn the wagon with chains called stay chains. They would pull the axle. That would prevent the hounds from being broken. There's the toolbox on this wagon, one of the most beautiful toolboxes. Photographed many times. You'll see that in magazines or books. This is the other Valentine Moyer wagon. Like I said, this hauled freight to Washington troops at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777 and 78, as well as Braddock's troops earlier in 1755. Like I said, this only went probably as far, as Fort Necessity because it couldn't have gone any further. Luckily, it did. There's a toolbox in that. Most wagons have their toolbox lids broken. This is Ron Bowman, who was a trapper, man of Township, trapped all over the place. And we asked him one day, he said, hey, Ron, would you like to come and get a picture taken of this? And so we did. But we did a display. He helped us do a trapping display at the Fetcher House one time, standing room only. It wasn't even standing room, shoulder to shoulder. And he talked for a couple hours, and he really enjoyed it. Okay, the Conestoga Wagoneer starts to decline about 1850s. We're going to give you a little timeline. 1781, York is founded. Remember I said 1729, Lancaster. 1802, DuPont comes from France and sets up his powder mills in the Brandywine River. He was a chemist. He wanted to make powder. He made powder over Europe. He was here in 1802. That's why they have 1802 on that wagon cover. The powder that he made was so far superior to the English powder that it wasn't even there was so much of a difference it couldn't be said. But anyway, also, this amazes me, DuPont would get some of his ingredients from China. That's something, even back then. How did he do that? 1804, Lewis and Clark go on an expedition and return in 1806. Thomas Jefferson wanted to buy New Orleans. He said that controlled all of the Mississippi River. So he said to James Monroe and Robert Livingston, he said, I want you to go over there and buy that, but we got to talk to Congress first. So Congress allotted $2 million to buy New Orleans. Well, before James Monroe and Livingston left, Thomas Jefferson says, I want you to offer him $10 million. So they go over there, they talk to Napoleon. Napoleon says, I'm not going to sell you New Orleans for $10 million. I'll sell you the whole Louisiana territory for $15 million. So they come back, they tell Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson says, well, we have to go through Congress and get that okay. He said, we don't have time. We have to go back over there because that was an emotional outburst by Napoleon. So they went over there and bought that land. It came to 4 cents an acre. It was like 15 cents, or 15 states, is that right? Yeah. 15 different, he's a history teacher. Can I get my grade changed? So anyway, it ended up, we bought all that land and for 4 cents an acre, see? Well, the reason we did that, the reason why Jefferson wanted that is because it had a huge drain basin, it drained a huge basin from Pittsburgh on the Ohio River. Remember I talked about the Ohio River? You can get on a boat in the Ohio River in Pittsburgh and go the whole way to Louisiana, down there to New Orleans. That river drained everything from the Alleghenies, the west of the Alleghenies, the whole way over to the Pacific slopes of Idaho. Imagine that, millions of acres. So they were at double the size of our country at that time. Stagecoaches started coming in 1827. They could travel 60 to 70 miles a day because they would go from one depot to another, change horses, restage, and then go on to the next stop. Conestoga wagons could only go 15 miles a day. It was said that my great-great-great-grandfather, who was, I think he was 14 years old, took a 6-horse hitch to Philadelphia and back. Took him 5 days, 14 years old. The first railroads from 1829. If you get a chance, go to the B&O Railroad Museum. It's a really neat museum. It has a roundhouse there. You see a Conestoga wagon in the back. That was an early Conestoga wagon at one time, but the roof collapsed several years ago, or many years ago. I remember when that happened, a snowstorm, and demolished a lot of the antique, demolished the wagon, plus a lot of the cars, railroad cars, the engines. And but this is what apparently what the first railroad would look like. Also, John Studebaker builds wagons in 1830 to 1836. His house is still there in East Berlin, Adams County. And ironically, last night, we got an email from somebody in, where was that, Seattle, Washington, who wants to study their genealogy. And he said, he's related to the Studebakers. Do I know anything about it? That's something, just last night. I could tell him, I'm going to tell him, I'll say, the house is still there. The forge, his forge was still in that house in the late 80s, but someone who bought that house after that tore the forge out. Why would you do that? They should have never been allowed to do that. But the people that own it now are really nice people. They didn't do that, but they take good care of that. You can see how beautiful that looks. Really nice people, nice, fun to talk to. They know their history. Okay. Cyrus McCormick invents the Reaper, 1831. Conestoga wagons. Still hauling freight. If you go down Route 81, you'll see a sign that says Cyrus McCormick Museum. Stop in there. It's only about a mile off the main road, isn't it? Maybe not even that. Has a little mill there with water power. It's owned by Virginia Tech. It's free. You can go in and give a donation if you like. It's a beautiful little place to eat your lunch. So you'll see Cyrus McCormick. You'll see models, really neat models that they made of the Reaper. 1834, like I said, this on Wagon Works, building their wagons. Where? Down the Great Wagon Road. See, down the Great Indian Path. 1840, Wilderness Road, almost abandoned, do the National Road. Well, Wilderness Road is right by Heather's school. She got graduated from Lincoln Memorial, a doctorate degree in veterinary medicine. Her school is right along the Wilderness Trail. You lived right there, didn't you? It's still there, but it's so rural. See that the Conestoga Teamsters, they weren't going to go down there and haul any freight. They didn't have any freight to haul. The only person who was going down there is like Daniel Boone when he took his family down there back. See, so that was almost abandoned. Do the National Road. They could get more freight out of Baltimore and Washington, going down to Wheeler, West Virginia, and out to Vandalia, Illinois. They could go to Trenton, New Jersey. They could go to Philadelphia. They could go to Newark. They could go anywhere up there. You got all kinds of commerce. That's why the Southern people didn't win the Civil War. They did not have the technology and industrialization that we had here. See, if I look at a wagon, any wagon, and somebody says, what do you think of this? I can look at the wagon. I can tell you where that wagon was made. Whether it was made in the north or the south. Why do you think? How do you think I can tell? Because of the ironwork. The blacksmiths up here were so talented. You could look at a wagon. My son does the same thing. My daughter say, this wasn't made in Lancaster County. This wasn't made in Chester County. This wasn't made in the north. It was made in the south. Why? Because the slaves were most of the people doing the iron work. They weren't the craftsmen they should have been. They didn't have the knowledge. Simple as that. So they abandoned, like I said, the Wilderness Road was abandoned due to national road. 1850s, the Conestoga wagon starts to decline. Here it starts to decline. The last Conestoga wagons that we know of that were made, that we can tell, and the reason why, because some are bolted together, we can tell if they're bolted or riveted or nailed together. So we study that too. We can see if the wagons have a nut on the axle or linchpin. Here, Henry S. Hirsch in New Danville made wagons for over a century. We have one of the last wagons he made. Here's Albert S. Hirsch in New Danville there. We have a blacksmith we know, Stan Newcomer. Do anybody know him? Stan Newcomer does blacksmithing. Okay, yeah, how are you doing? Stan is a great grandson of this man. If Stan were to walk in here today, you'd say, my gosh, he looks just like him. He does. He looks identical. Anybody know Rick Browse? Yeah, Rick Browse is related to him too. One time we had a family contacted us. They wanted to see a Hirsch wagon. There it is. This is Darrell Wagner and Charles Lindsay. Charles Lindsay has since passed. We did work for Disney there. I think that's the time we did work with Disney, Smithsonian. We're making a documentary for Fort Duquesne, or no, Fort Necessity. And so the people from the Smithsonian, they came up, they wanted to critique what we're doing. The Disney wanted to see, I forget who else. But anyway, this doctor from the Smithsonian says, Art, he said, just how old was that leather on those horses? I said, well, probably 150, 200 years old. Oh, come on. No, come on. That's not gonna, you can't have harness that old. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, you see how they're driving it? Oh, yeah. I said, that's what they had done 200 years ago, just exactly like that. I said, so you think we're not going to put on exactly the same type of harness? But I said, that is probably 150 years old. So I said, when Charlie Lindsay drives down, turns around, which had to go like 100 to 200 yards, turn around and come back, I said, you ask him how old that harness is. So he did. He said, Mr. Lindsay, he said, just how old is that harness? He said, Charlie said, probably 200 years old. He goes, how can that be? He said, well, it was my great-grandfather's. And Charlie was like 75 years old there, see? And then we had Darrell Wagner riding on the lazy board. Darrell is still living. Charlie has since passed. But Darrell is one of the few people, there are only like 5 of us that have driven a jerk line team. I drove a jerk line team for a short time with mules. I've not driven horses, but Darrell does that. And that's my next project. I want to get a 6-bell team together, mules or horses. But they're so expensive. When I read Belgian horses, you gave them away basically. Dad said something, I should have listened to him. He said, you want to take some of your nice horses? Trade up.
I think that's the last
Yeah.
slide too.
That's it. Here's the hobbles. You can come up and look at these. Here's a whip. Here's a story matches whip. I went to Nestville. There was an auction there at Nestville, and went in there and I bought this whip. For like $150, and I thought it was a lot of money. So I asked the man who was late in his 90s, who owned the property. I said, sir, I said, is this your property? He said, yes. I said, well, you were selling all kinds of leather tools. Came out of a leather shop. I said, where did you get all these tools? Well, they were my great-grandfather's. I said, really? I said, did he make any Conestoga team harness? Oh, no, he never made any of that. He never did. I said, is that right? I said, what's this? Well, I don't know. It's a whip probably for oxen. I said, no, it isn't. It's a Conestoga team whip. I said, where was his shop? He told me. I said, I have a side saddle that came out of that shop. I said, he made Conestoga team harness. This man was 91 years old, didn't even know what his great-grandfather had done. That's sad. So anyway, I bought this whip, and another thing, I read an article in a local magazine that said Conestoga drovers, they were drovers. Conestoga Teamsters were not drovers, they were Teamsters. The difference between a Teamster is the one who drives horses or equine, the drover drives oxen. They're bovine. Here's a set of boots, came from Don Kirkabeel from the Smithsonian. He said these are the type that would be used. They call these stogies. If you're welcome to come up and look at these things, here's a grease pot, here's a hammer pin that goes in the double tree. And you see the jockey stick, I explained that. What else do we have there? A spreader. Oh, that's it. Anybody know what that is?
Entering the wheel.
I know you know. What is that, Tyler?
Traveler.
Yeah, wheel traveler. Right, measure the circumference of the wheel. In order to use that, what they do, how they use it, they would take a wheel and have the felloes around it, and they have the hub, the spokes put in, the fellow, which is the wooden part, going around and joining all the spokes. Then you put a tire. You want to put a tire on that. So what we do is take a wheel traveler, measure the circumference around it, and then they subtract about a ½ inch off of there. They had a scale, and of course these blacksmiths that did this, wheelwrights that did this, they didn't need to figure it all out. They could look at something, eyeball it, and say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. So they measure the iron with that wheel traveler. We'll show them how to do that. There's a notch in there. You want to show them the notch? Should be. You found it on there. It's right there. They put that notch on the one end of the iron tire and roll it and count how many times it turned, how many revolutions. Then they would, like I said, make it about a ½ inch shorter. And they put a tire bender and they bend that tire around and they lap weld it in a forge, which I've done. And then they take that tire, put it on a pile of brush and burn it. While they're doing that, the tire's getting hot. It's expanding. Then they take a pair of tongs, specially designed to pick that tire up. You want a pair of tongs that when you push a handle shut, the tongs are like this, it clamps it. So you get 2 or 3 guys. Some of those really we have a Wagoneer at home that was weighed. The front tire weighs 275 pounds. The front wheel 275 pounds. The back wheel we figured probably 400 or 500. That's just one wheel. So anyway, they roll that out, weld it. They take that tire was hot, take it up, put it over top that wheel that's on the wheel buck. You take a hammer and pound that tire around those fellows. While they're doing that, you take a sprinkler can, a water can, and water that down so it doesn't burn the fellows. I had some men, I worked at Paul Martin's carriage home, and some men came over to me from out the west, and 3 young guys, and they said, Mr. Reist, we heard that you shrank tires on wagon wheels by hand. I said, yeah. They said, well, here's what we did. We did exactly what you said, but we heard that wheel creaking and cracking, and he said, we thought it was going to break, so we cut the tire off of it. I said, why did you do that? Well, we thought it was going to break. I said, all I was doing was shrinking and pulling all that together like a glove. And some of those wheels, we have wheels at home that have never been touched, that are still as tight. Those tires are still as tight, and they're 200 and some years old. Yes.
2 questions. The Teamsters you're talking about, is that what evolved into modern day Teamsters?
Yes.
And okay, that's a quick answer. And,
Well, I'll tell you a story about that.
okay, but another question is the wagons that the people went out west on, they evolved from the Conestoga wagons? Is that a completely different story?
Completely different. Studebaker, I told you about, started in South Bend, or started here at East Berlin, went to Ashland, Ohio, then out to South Bend. They made a lot of those prairie scooters, what do you call prairie scooter? Prairie scooter is completely different than a Conestoga wagon. It's a 2-horse wagon, basically. Ridden into wagon, people ride in it. Conestoga wagons, they did. So, also, you talk about Teamsters. Here's a story. We did a job while we made the movie Beloved, helped make the movie Beloved. We hauled our wagons. We were supposed to haul our wagons down to Civic Center. We're down to Civic Center with a truckload of wagons. just 2 or 3, but we took 13 total. Went down there, went to the gate. Guess who's standing there? The Teamsters. You know what they said? You're not coming on here. They said, you're not coming on here. I said, is that right? See how? I said, let me tell you something. We've been Teamsters before you were. How so? I said, we hold Conestoga wagons. So the guy says, let me talk to my advisor. Went back, guess what? They said, you come in. I said, yeah. They haul all our wagons. They said, all right, anytime you want a wagon haul, anytime you want to do something, you call us, we'll haul. They didn't charge us 1 penny. They hauled all over the place. They were really nice. They said, and they came up to our house. I had a wagon. Well, the one freight wagon I showed you, I told the Disney people, I said, if I lose anything off a wagon, you bought the wagon. So guess what? They brought one of that big freight wagon back, and the back board, the tail board was off the tail of the wagon and missing. So I called in California to the Disney people. The man who's in charge of that, who was union also, got on a jet. He said, I'm flying to Philadelphia right now. He flew to Philadelphia. Guess where he found that end board? Right beside the dumpster.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yes.
At the Conestoga Area Historical Society Museum in Conestoga, we have 3 Conestoga wagons on display. And when people come in quite often, they say, oh, this is the wagon that went west. And I say, no, not exactly. As you said, they were the freight wagons. They were basically freight. People rode in sleighs or carriages or stagecoaches. And people say, oh, this is the wagon that went west. And I say, not really. With the size of practically no family could have afforded a wagon that size, plus 6 animals to pull it. In fact, you couldn't have gotten it over the Mississippi River. There were no bridges. You couldn't have dragged it over the plains and over the Rockies. There's documentation that they barely went farther west in Indiana or Illinois. They did go, as you said, to Winston-Salem, to the Moravians down there. The wagons the wagons that went west were the prairie schooners. They were lighter in weight, smaller in size. They were a covered wagon. Not all covered wagons are Conestoga wagons. And the Conestoga wagon has this distinction of a Western wagon. And I think it occurred in the late 1920s, early 1930s, when the sound motion pictures were invented. There was a great praise for Western movies. I think some art director in California said the prairie schooners were downright dowdy, ugly looking little wagons. The Conestoga wagon is more aesthetic, more artistic. It photographs better. We'll use the Conestogas in the movies. And that's how I think the fallacy actually came. But they could not go west of Bannister for that song.
Right. When I had some woman from Washington College, she said her parents live in Ohio. They have a wagon in the collection in a museum. I was supposed to go out and look at it and see if I could buy it from them because they wanted to sell it to me. Anyway, I go out there, this man is in his 90s, and he starts telling me, he said, let me tell you about this wagon. This happened a couple times. Heather and I had an experience here the other year. But anyway, this man says, let me tell you about this Conestoga wagon. He said, this wagon went to California and back. I said, Mr. Broad. I said, no, it didn't. I said, this came out of Bruce Meyer's collection in 1976, sold for $1,700. Bruce Meyer's lived down at 896 and 30, where that shopping center is now, where Bob Evans is now. He must have had 30 wagons. I said, it sat in the barn in one bay. I told him where it was. He said, I guess I can't lie to you anymore. So then a couple years ago, we bought the SG's wagon. My daughters and I went up there to see this. The man said the same thing. Let me tell you about this wagon. I said, okay. Didn't even get it. So the girls were standing there, and he starts telling about this Conestoga wagon he has, which is a good one, that big one that we had, the 11 bow. And I'm standing there, and he says to his wife, he says, what was her name, Gladys or whatever? He says, get back in my bedroom and get the white and blue book. Get the book, Kate, wherever it is. Get the book. I want to show you about this. I'm going to show you what kind of Conestoga wagons they have. These people in Lancaster, have these wagons, and one sold for $41,000. He said just the other week. He said that's what I want for mine. He said, you don't know anything about Conestoga wagons or not much. I said, well, just a minute. Can I look at that? He goes, yeah, go ahead. I go, he's telling me about how he went to California and back. I said, who do you think that is? Didn't he? He goes, oh my gosh, that's you. He said, I guess I can't lie to you anymore.
They weren't lying, they were just sadly mistaken.
That's
Great art.
But that's the thing. People talk about the praise scooter, how these wagons went out. When they went out there, they never came back. And I have a friend of mine that bought stagecoaches. He'd pay $150,000 or so for a stagecoach here and take them out. And I said, Jack, what's the oldest thing you have out there? He said, they're still walking around, meeting the people. He said, we don't have what you have here. And one time I was just happened to be working on an early wagon running gear, a small one, really small, and it has the dish in the wheel. The dish was put in the wheel, so it allowed the spokes in the bottom to work while the others rested. And also kept the mud and everything off the hubs. Anyway, I was just working on that, and I took the one wheel off. It hadn't been off in all my lifetime. We got it at a sale probably for $15. So I take this little wheel, the tires only about this wide, linchpin gear, and I'm working on greasing these wheels. So I take this wheel and it's on stone, my stone driveway. Dan's been in all place. Stone driveway. So I set this wheel on the driveway and turn around and walk away, still standing upright. So I thought, you know what? I ought to take a picture of this. So I took a picture of this, and about an hour later, some woman from Santa Rosa, California calls, ironically, and she says, we have a tar pot like this. And she explained how that was, and she said, can you tell me how to use that? I said, yeah, and I explained to her. I said, by the way, this is ironic that you called me because I said, I'm greasing the wheels on this old wagon gear. She said, can you send me pictures? So I took a picture of it and sent it to her. She said, that's photographic trickery. So what do you mean? Yeah, she says, no way that wheel is going to stand on stone by itself. I said, it is. That's how well balanced that those wheelwrights made that wheel. And after 150 years, still stood the time. Any other questions? I guess I bored you.
So did I hear you say, Art, that the artifacts are here, but if you went to like the Santa Fe Trail out there, you're saying that the artifacts somehow are just not there anymore? The wagons aren't out there, they just.
Oh yeah, they're there.
Oh, okay. They just never came back.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what it is. One time, you know where our church is there, Highland Presbyterian Church. My children and wife were gone, and I went to church that morning, and then after church in the summertime, I went over to a local convenience store and bought an iced tea. And I look up, and I see this dually truck sitting there with this RV license plate on the front. So, dumb me, I go over and I say, hey, I said, you came a long way to get a drink, didn't you? The guy says, oh yeah. He says, we're here for genealogy. I said, are you really? I said, well, who are you related to? He said, the Lannis brothers down here. I said, you're talking to your cousins. I said, they're my great-grandmother's cousins. My great-grandmother was named Susan Her Landis Reist. Her father was a Landis who was a brother to the Landis brothers' father. Okay, so they were cousins. And Her is from the Her family. See, we're all related. And if I would say with a real stall screw staying up, you know, probably all this was staying up. So anyway, this man says, he says, so you're related to Lance Brothers? I said, sure. He said, I said, how did you get out? How are you doing, Mr. Burkle? I didn't see you there. Here's what my history teachers do. Can I change my grade here? Best history teachers in the world. Like it. So anyway, I said to him, I said, how in the world did you get out there? He said, how do you think? He said, we left here in 1850 and went out by horse and wagon. He said, some of our belongings are still along the Oregon Trail. He said, but you know what? We cannot pick them up. We're not allowed to touch them. He said, I said, where do you live? He said, we live at the dead end of the Oregon Trail. That's where we stopped. And we've been there ever since. But he said, our ancestors are the Lannis brothers and all us. So he came over, he wanted to see the wagons. I wanted to see the tools. What else he was? Anyway, and he sent me, I said, can you send me information? He sent me a whole raft of information about the Oregon Trail. I read an article also about, in a magazine that said that too. It said that the wagons, Conestoga wagons went out the Oregon Trail, went out the Santa Fe Trail. And I called the lady and I said, this is a bogus information. Where did you get that? She said, I got information from museum people. That's sad. From museum people. They got it from, you know, some bartender or somebody I can understand. but it was untrue. And she called me and she told it to me. She said, just who you are, how are you? I told her who it was. She said, I have your dad's book sitting on my lap. I said, you should have read the book.
So conversely, how far have the Conestoga wagons been found, to your knowledge? You said Ashland, Ohio?
Oh, they go out to Indiana, like this gentleman said, and Illinois, some places. But we've sold wagons now, you know, they traveled, but they didn't go out, they didn't go any further than, like this gentleman said, Vandalia, Illinois. That's what they had, you know, the national road, right? But the wagons that people ask me too, did they find all the wagons? I don't think we have. There was a wagon that sold down in Maryland. It was an early wagon. I have yet to see it. I don't know what condition it is. A friend of mine bought it. But you never know where they are, where they turn up. We haven't found every one. And the sad part is some of those wagons are not appreciated and are burned with the buildings, or they're destroyed or left sit out. So it's sad that people do that, but and sometimes people that own the wagons don't take care of them correctly. Right, 2 parts linseed oil, 1 part turpentine. That thing's a linseed oil out. We learned that many years ago. Now, come on up and look at these things. You're welcome to look at that. There's a collar, hinge, leg chain. I did bore you.